Hey, how you guys doing? Let's do it to it. And we're gonna go on through it. Okay, let's pull up a board. I should go to our studies. Oops, I have to, sorry, board editor, that's right. Let's do white. Alright, we're getting it. Let me make sure we have this right. Okay. Let's see. Got that. Okay. So if it's white to move, black's knight on h5 was hoping to hop into f4, but white played g2 to g3, left it basically in limbo. If you want to get back into the game, it has to retreat. However, the other black knight on b7 has high hopes of living large is in charge on c5. Once there, if white chases it to b, back to the b, the knight could then hop into d3. D3? Did I say that right? could munch on e4. So you have to always be on guard here. So the knight, if it could get to, so this knight would love to have gotten to here, but it can't. This knight, no, it wants to get here. If a pawn kicks it, it could actually take the light squared bishop on d3, and then have the two bishop pair. Again, a little pawn will dominate a big powerful horse. What is the move that white played here that would stop black's idea for the knight? If you said that white played b4, you were spot on. b4 is an exclam move. And then once again, the knight that was hoping on b7 to jump, excuse me, to jump to c5 is it's all of its hopes gone. So now the knight is actually a really, both knights are bad for black. The knight has to go back b7. The knight would have to go back b7. Then f6 would have to get played here. The knight then would have to come here, and then the knight would have to be able to come in, and the white knight would just trade off for the black knight, and there's no real hope anymore. As you can see, using pawns to limit the activity of the enemy knight is a very important strategic idea. Get used to employing it, and watch the opponent's knights wither and fade away. Finally, it's time to address one of his favorite knight maneuvers. He played against an opponent. He did this one game and he was really happy with it. So we're going to go over that game. Actually, let's just do our studies, because he takes it from the we could pull up another one. Okay, d4, knight f6, knight f3, c5, d5, d6, knight c3, G6, A4, bishop G2, G7, bishop B5 check, bishop knight BD7, A4, black castled, white castled, A6 to kick the knight out, bishop B2, and then B6. He wants black wants to try to fianchetto his bishop to B6 basically. Rook E1, knight E8. Ooh, he's got the idea of trying to break the center with F5. So let's see how Jeremy Silman handles that. Bishop F4. Developing. Nice. Queen C7. Still don't understand. Let me see why he didn't play that. Maybe because takes here, takes there. Maybe it has to do with something to do with the outpost there that he was concerned about, that his opponent would not be able to dislodge the knight at that point. I think that has to do with something like that. Queen D2, and if Jeremy Silman gets the right, he's going to play H6 to trade off the bishop. Knight E5. Knight takes, pawn takes, and then bishop H6, just like what we said. Kabang. Queen D6. Bishop takes and king takes. Now when the fianchettoed bishop comes off the board in front of the king, it's a huge accomplishment that white gets to be able to do that, because now these spots end up becoming vulnerable to knight outposts. Those end up becoming very weak, and the light dark squares end up becoming very weak as well. So all the dark squares cannot really be occupied anymore by a bishop to challenge it. So the knight in theory could dominate on the dark squares. Okay. Alright. White notices that the potential weaknesses lie on B6, C5, which is the pawn, and when that falls, E5, which there's at the moment it's not being protected but by the queen. And then he says no, C5 isn't a tempo. The seemingly solid C5 pawn can easily be lost after a well-timed A4 to A5 pawn move with proper attacking chances. Pushing and undermining the defense of B6. Of course, both B6 and E5 might become the tender spot for black. White could bring pieces to bear on them, but how can this be done? Let me remind you of the earlier psychology of chess through Chess Mastery. Through Chess Mastery is a mix of knowledge. I underline that. That's interesting. A mix of knowledge, awareness, and willpower. So it's K A W. You can remember it as KW. Knowledge, awareness, and willpower. If you wanted to abbreviate it so you'll never forget it, KAW. This is yet another example of the motif white knows uh, has the knowledge base on has knowledge based on often seen patterns. So white has the basically Jeremy Silman's white. He has seen many patterns in this type of situation where a5 or a4 to a5, the c pawn on c5 will end up becoming a tender spot for black, and it could actually fall at the right move. And so c5 isn't a the c5 pawn isn't really cemented in stone. So that's kind of what he's saying. These patterns are there. You just have to see them. That this kind of pawn structure can lead to difficulties for black. He's aware that the unformidable pawns could become weak. Yeah, if there was some way to get to these pieces within a striking range. So let me reread that. Okay, that is the kind of pawn structure that could lead to difficulties for black. So this right here, difficulty for black. He's aware that the basically the pawn formation could become weak if there was some way to get his pieces within striking range. And finally, he wants to maximize his piece setup that will accomplish his goals. That will accomplish his goals. So he realizes that Black realizes that what they have to do is stop the attack, and basically get their either like what we talked about. If you're in a closed position, cramped position, you want to trade pieces. If you're the one that's cramping the position, you want to keep the pieces on the board, and so you won't do that. So Blacks knows that they're in a pretty problematic setup here. Jeremy Silman's pawns as white really don't have weaknesses. There's just a tremendous amount of weaknesses for black to be concerned about, and he's just got to seal up all of his weaknesses. So what pieces in the white army will be able to extend pressure against the designated targets? Certainly the bishops cannot, since it's a light square bishop and the pawns lie on dark squares. The knight though would be a tower of strength on c4, were it not to be kicked out by the queen. Let's see, tower of strength on c4, where it would kick the enemy queen and take direct aim on b6. So if we can get a knight to c4, it would attack the queen and attack b6 and e5 at the same time. White's queen can also join the party via queen to e2 or e3, hitting the c5 pawn, anticipating the a4 to a5 break, and also giving c4 some more support. While placing it on c3 seems even better, since it eyes c5 and e5. It attacks the pawn at e5. That leaves the a pawn with its a4 to a5, and then the f2 pawn with a dream of f4 to f2 to f4. So how can white create such a position? This calls for the setup. This calls for the setback bogeys. It's Boogie. But oh, it must be. It's a. Oh, I get it. Boogie. I said that wrong. That is funny. So the knight's gonna dance a little bit, and this is a double esclam. Very shocking move that is intuitive, but also very logical. The knight returns to its beginning square because it just wasn't happy on c3. Remember that a piece is only happy if it's on a square where it can help the overall game plan. In this case, the knight on c3 might look okay on c3, but it's not addressing all the issues that were discussed earlier. Like targeting e5, b6, a4 to a5, and all that. However, wouldn't it be basically a killer idea if the knight could get to c4? It's not only one sees that this odd retreat ties everything together. c3 is now clear for the white queen. Well, the knight will head to c4 via knight to a3 to c4. Our knight to d2 to c4. So black's queen plays bishop to queen to f6. This allows white to make his vision a reality. Instead, moves such as bishop d7 are bishop b7 would limit white's advantage. Another possibility is the knight going to f6. When aside from e3, pawn e3 is interesting. So I'm not sorry, queen e3. Knight a. Well, maybe knight a3 is interesting. I mean, knight takes e4, queen e3, knight f6, knight c4, knight takes d5, knight takes d6, knight takes e3, knight takes c8, knight takes c2, knight takes b6, rook a7, and then a5. With a pleasant edge for white here. Even though you're thinking, wait a second, he could just grab a rook. Yeah, but does these two rooks really have any power? I don't think so. I don't buy it. Maybe if rook d8, you could even trade off. And then he can't play rook here, so maybe he'll try something like that. And then bishop e, and then if he tries here, you take. And then if he tries checking, you retreat the bishop back. He could try to get in behind the pawn, but then you could just push. And if he tries that, you can just push, takes, and push, and then he takes your knight. So there's not really much that black could do. He could try to push here to block that. But then you could take, after rook takes, then you take, and you're, oh, wait a second, hold on. Yeah, if he takes, you now have, you're attacking the rook, you have a passed pawn. So the rook would have to come. Now you're attacking, comes there, and you're just gonna, you could potentially go towards a draw. So f6. So an edge. After he chops one of the rooks, a rook and 2 pawns for 2 miter pieces, but the 2 miter pieces will be very nicely placed, while the A and the C pawns will prove to be extremely weak in this type of setup here. After let me see right here, after this right here, we're going to get to this part. These 2 pawns here will become extremely weak, and you got to see how they fell apart. So queen C C3, knight D6, knight D2, E6. Now white played A5. Exclam. He took the initiative and said, you know what? It's time to win a pawn. Instead of playing bishop to F1, I played A to B5. A move later would have been thematically destroys white's queenside. This move right here, queenside pawn chain at the base, and gains a clear advantage here. So later on he actually won. Let's see if there's a game that, if there may be a game. Nope, no game. But if you want to look it up, you can. And he ended up, I think, winning this game. Excuse me. Now, let's see. We're going to wrap up this chapter. Knights are minor pieces along with bishops and are generally given 3 points, 3 pawn points. Knights crave advanced points, basically outposts. A safe square that can easily be challenged by a hostile pawn is an outpost. Since they are short-range pieces, having access to such squares is a huge part of the knight's strategy. So they want to be at a spot where they can't be challenged. Like if, surprisingly, if this were to happen, the knight would love to be on c4 now. There's no way in the world except for this knight that it would be challenged. And so that's kind of the idea, is this would be a good outpost for a knight. So knights gain in strength as they move further up the board. As we have seen, a knight stuck on the first or the second rank is a defensive piece and is inferior to a healthy bishop. This is funny. A diseased bishop is quite another matter. What that means is, if a bishop is behind its pawns entombed, excuse me, then what happens is the bishop is basically just a tall pawn, and it doesn't matter even if your knight's on the second or the first rank. Knight on the third rank is a flexible warhorse and can be used for defense or attack at a moment's notice. A knight on the third often has several central influences. A knight on the fourth ranks and has a support point is very strong, a flexible piece. You can count on it to be able to perform both defensive and attacking duties. A knight on the fifth rank with a support point can be a beautiful thing to behold, he says. Its potential possible offensive weapon and is usually superior to a bishop at that point if it can get to the fifth and stay there. A knight on the sixth rank is support point can make this is funny. The children weep and the women cry for joy. That was a joke that he put in here. He kind of in the medieval times when the knights were winning, everybody would be happy. They'd be like that. That actually meant it was in our terms when we say weep, we think of it as bad. In the medieval times, that was like something to behold. It's a beautiful thing to have your knights be victorious on the battlefield. Everybody would be cheering. The kids would be crying because they're happy. There's happy tears. I know you're thinking, wait, is there such a thing? Yeah, there's like when you maybe graduate from college and your parents go and watch you walk, and your mom or dad is teary-eyed a little bit. Those are happy tears. They're not crying because they're sad. That's kind of what he's talking about here. And here, a knight transforms from a war horse to an octopus. Octopus it can hit, like if a knight's here, it can hit, I'll show you. If a knight's here, it can hit all these points here. It could say if a knight could come here, it could hit all those points. And that's why they call it an octopus. If it gets to there, it's even more powerful if it can get to d5. And okay, it may apply striking out in all directions and claiming enemy territory as its own. Such a knight is at times stronger than even a rook. A knight a knight on the 7th and 8th give us cause for dismissing small returns. Once past the 6th, it doesn't have control as many squares as it reached. Oh, sorry. I have to let me reread that again. Okay. Because I think I got a couple words messed up there. A knight on the 7th and 8th ranks give us a cause of diminished return. Once past the 6th, it no longer controls as many squares, since its reach runs out of the board. Usually knights on such an advanced rank is performing some sort of tactical or search and destroy operations. So your knight basically ends up becoming a seek and destroy. It's the kind of thing if you have heat-seeking, like a heat-seeking rocket, it's going to follow signals, okay? So basically that's what they're trying to say is a knight that gets on the 7th or the 8th is doing one purpose. It's seeking its prey. It's no longer like being an octopus. It's no longer just standing there dominating everything. It's going after something. A knight smells a piece is weak, and the knight is going to go take down whatever the prey is. That's kind of what he's saying here. Knights are the best blockaders of enemy passed pawns. The reason for this is simple. Unlike other pieces, a knight that sits in front of the enemy pawn isn't losing any of its mobilizing advantage, mobility. It's actually advanced. So if this knight could potentially get let me see. The knight here is a good example. It's blocking the d5 pawn from being pushed, right? But does it still have all of its power? Yes, it does. It still has all the power, but it's blocking the d5 pawn from being pushed. So that's a good knight. Knights are short-range pieces, unlike bishops, which can slide the length of the board in one single move. Knights are more resilient than the active bishop. So they're more restrictive, than the active bishop. That's what bishops have for an advantage, is they can travel from here all the way to there, or if they're here all the way to there, or if this bishop could come to here to there, this bishop could come from there all the way to there, or here to here, and it just has that. Knights can jump over pieces. There isn't anything else. There isn't anything else that can do this. This is an advantage for a knight. Knights have the potential to attack or defend anything on any colored square. It might take several moves, but eventually they will get there. Bishops are always stuck on one color. It's an advantage for a knight. Knights do quite well in close positions because, unlike bishops, pawns can't block them. Advantage knight. Because knights are short-range pieces, you need to calmly march them to desired outposts. This might take 2 or 3 moves, but it isn't something that needs to be done. But it isn't something that needs to be done. Let me see. This might take 2 or 3 moves, but it is something that needs. Is not. Sorry, it is. But it's something that needs to be done. Okay, this might take 2 or 3 moves, but it's something that needs to be done. So is not. It's actually is. Sometimes you have to take 3 moves to get your knight to where it needs to be. It's something that has to get done. So it's probably that'd be a disadvantage of a knight. Its lack of mobility. If you hear a square calling out to your knight, or see a beckoning glow, do everything in your power to get your knight there. It doesn't matter if you have to move forward, backwards, sideways, or a combination of all these things to reach it. Just because a minor piece is nicely developed to the usual respective squares on the third rank, doesn't mean it's doing anything from that post. Does it have a future on that square? Is it working with other pieces towards the fulfillment of some unified plan? If the answer to this question is no, then it's important. It is important that you find a better home for the knight, and then do your utmost to get it there. Okay. Let me see here. I just want to make sure I have. Okay. Let me get a drink and then we'll do. See, how much time do we have left? Perfect. We have enough for a couple more examples. Okay. Well, knights slowly but surely hop and leap to wherever area of the board they wish to go. Bishops, also known in various They are known in various as um, insane circles as bellhops. That's one of their names. Bees, which because bees go real fast, and wily angel sliders. What that means is, and two bishops are on an occasion referred to as Jan, oddly to I think they call them rabbis. I think two rabbis. I think that's what they call them. That's the old medieval terms. They called them. That was what they called these pieces before. We call them bishops. Different places call them different things, and certain areas around the world they're called certain different things too. So we just call them. We have a standard term nowadays called bishop, and so we just call them a bishop. But they had, during Jeremy Silman's era of play, they had many different names that they called them, kind of nicknames. But we're just gonna call him a bishop for a time being. Those were the nicknames they called him. They can roar across the length of the board in a single move. It lives for speed. Basically, if you want to think of this, if you think of it as a car, like a very fast race car, and the race car things when it goes around and around and around, these can slide from A1 to H8 in one move. So this is like a car going like 180 miles an hour in one direction. So this is a speedy car if you want to think about it. I like calling them snipers because the reason I like that, my nickname for them is that, is because you can be thinking, I put my piece on a protective square, but in reality you forgot that the bishop is eyeing that, and then therefore you lose the piece to the bishop. So and that's just a term I call it. I like calling them snipers. So like people have different names for different pieces. Like some people call these horses, and some call them knights. It all depends on what you prefer. It's not wrong. So, and some call these like pawns, are foot soldiers, are all different types of names. And the queen, in some cultures, is considered an advisor to the king. So we call it the queen, though. So you have to always remember different cultures call it different names. And come to find out, I didn't know that even some notations, they actually write a different letter for the knight. It's kind of odd. I don't really remember what it was, but they actually, in certain nations, they write it differently. Rather, like when we put an N, it's different there. So just a little bit of fun history there. Okay. Like a race car makes everything that there's, okay, base good. This means that if there's a diagonal that isn't blocked, the bishop can be a fierce and high prized piece. Having historically even been viewed either good or bad. So if there's a bunch of pawns, like let's say white had a bunch of pawns like this, the bishop in theory would be considered a bad bishop. But there's that Jeremy Silman is going to now talk about that there's bad active bishops. What that means is if you can, let's say you have the same pawns like this, right? But this bishop was outside the pawn chain. I just don't look at the knight can take it. Okay, I'm just giving you an example. The bishop would be at, let's say, b5, and then let's just say that the pawn can't take it. This is just for example purposes. This is considered a bad bishop if all the pawns were on light squares. But the one thing that makes it active is that it's outside the pawn chain that it's in. And you could turn a bad bishop to an active bad bishop. And we will learn that more as we go in through this book. are bad when players' central pawns are on the same color as the bishop. However, um, I no longer like these terms, deeming them instruction. But basically, he says that yes, it's bad, but does it do a good job? Yes. So it's not really a bad. However, long-term construction and at times confusing. They're like a bad bishop. For example, a bad bishop can often be active, like what we just talked about, and as a result, very strong. Or a bad bishop can be critically useful for defense. Thus, in this book, we'll refer to bishops as active, useful, or tall pawns. So active, we call them active bishops. Useful bishops are tall pawns. So it's basically doing away with the terms bad or good. And he's saying, is it an active piece? If the pawns are on light squares and the bishop's on b5, then it's an active piece. If it's inside the pawn chain, it's a tall pawn. Or if it's maybe guarding a passed pawn, let's say we have a dark squared bishop and there's a pawn on a7, the dark square bishop will hold that pawn and allow your king to get over there, and then you can queen and potentially win material. So it's useful. A bishop is considered active if it's outside the pawn chain or just enjoys life as a free reign, even though the pawns are on the same color as the bishop. A bishop is considered useful if it is doing an important defensive or dynamic job, or dynamic task, such as a defensive bishop can be ugly to look at, but it would be without this bishop under serious our position would be under serious problems. So like what he's trying to say here, okay, such a defensive piece can be ugly to look at, but its abstract would cause your position being taken away. So basically being taken away would cause your position to undergo serious difficulties. So if the piece wasn't defending that other piece, your position would be undermined basically. A bishop is a tall pawn if it's not serving a useful function and is trapped behind its pawns, thus making it inactive. This kind of bishop causes us to be basically considered an overgrown pawn. That sadly can't turn into a queen if it reaches the end of the board. Let's look deeper at each of these bishop types. So we're going to look a little deeper now. Giving this is one thing here. Giving a bishop, let me actually get this set up. Okay, dokie. See how we're doing on time. Okay, we'll do one example, then I'm going to probably say adieu. So my voice is a little dry today. We'll do one example. Okay, black to move here. Giving bishop a diagonal that's basically uncontested is like a pen. Well, let's see, pawns. Yeah, like you know how sometimes you see soda cans. Jeremy Silman said that sometimes if there's a lot of soda cans on the ground and you step on them, you kind of slip around and stuff. He says a bishop is kind of like that. If there's no cans in the way, soda cans that have been crushed, and you have free reign to run, you can run to the finish line. He also talked it's you don't want to make it your bishop pinned in, like otherwise if it's pinned in, then how are you going to be able to let it run free and be strong if it's not out there in the field to be an attacking piece. This doesn't mean that okay. Alright, let me see. Are a solid, well defending wall of enemy pawns. Pieces aren't good if they're clustered together, and you've considered it to be active. So if it's outside, let's say a lot of these pawns are just like this here, but this bishop's outside the pawn chain, it could look like a lot of cans are in the way because it's on the same color as the dark squared bishop. But in reality, the bishop has dodged all the cans of soda that have been crushed that's tried to stop it. And it's outside and it can do a lot of damage then. This doesn't mean, and we'll consider it to be active at that point. We'll consider that to be active, what we just talked about. This doesn't mean that an active bishop can single-handedly bring down the enemy position or that it will even succeed be successful successful like a menace, like something that's an irritant with the rest of its army. That's up to you and your skill at getting all your bits to work together with a particular goal. So if you get all your soldiers working together, then you bring your bishop in to help. You've got a unified force of an attack, and with proper play, you should win and work together for a particular goal. But an active bishop can dash from one sector to another in a flash. So they always need to be respected. So you should never not look at a bishop and say, I respect that bishop, but you always got to remember it's worth 3 pawns, the same as a knight. So just make sure if you have 2 knights versus 2 bishops, closed position makes sense. Your knights are better then. White has 2 active bishops, and his C4 bishop eyes F1 to A6. F1. Yeah, A6. It's this what he's talking about. F1 to A6, and A2 to G8. diagonals. While while his other bishop is c1 to h6 diagonal. It's considered on patrol, he says. Black's light squared bishop is also active since it eyes c8 all the way to h3, and the knight on d7 isn't considered in the way because it can move out of the bishop's way whenever it wishes. However, Black's e7 bishop isn't particularly active because it's blocked by the d pawn, of course. It does keep an eye on the shorter d8 to d4 diagonal, and it is also gives solid support to d6, so the d6 pawn. So it isn't not closed. It's not considered a tall pawn. In fact, the bishop can easily become something special after d6 to d5. Push and then it has f8 to a3 diagonal power, or it can assume a superior to white's, even if it may be capturing. Maybe if it captures a piece, it could do that, since recapturing by that wouldn't be good. So like if they're saying this, hey, so capturing, yep. So if takes here, and it takes there, then something like that could happen. And it's free. Something similar to that. Or if the knight moves, the bishop moves there, and you take, knight takes, and then pawn push. If takes, knight takes, takes, and now this bishop's a pretty active. Black's the one that has the two bishops now. Why are all the bishops? See diagram. The center is in flux right now, and this is diagram 48 in his book. It says, why are the bishops in diagram 48 at least reasonably active? Because the center is fluid and can be opened further when pawns are exchanged. However, a couple of poor moves can change everything. And Black caused the chaos to happen, this move right here, and it's actually a mistake. The move is a mistake. I'm sure that bishop to e7 isn't a practical move. This unfortunate advance also turns the d5 square into an outpost for white. So pawn d5, that was a blundered right back. White also has white obviously to need of white also seems to white white also seems to be oblivious. Which book is this? How to Reassess Your Chess, 4th edition. Trying to get this. Some of this is kind of a little difficult. I'm trying to think and do these moves. So basically, white doesn't understand that this hole here is a beautiful place to put a knight. So R, what he could do is play d takes e5, which is a good move. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, d takes e5, and then queen. Oh, not queen d2. We want to keep queens on because this is the only way we can get an advantage as white. Would be bad. So by plugging the hole, this is white would be in black would be in self-defense mode after this. Black with the hole on d5 while the bishop is on e7 is not a good idea. So with this move here, this made the bishop bad. First of all, this bishop was good. There's no real reason to yes, you're cramping the position, but now what is your light square bishop going to do? It's blocked in by your pawn. It's not a knight. So that basically almost the best thing you can do is play bishop b5 and trade off for this knight on d7. So okay. Also note that the light squared bishop is a real he calls it a fire breather, like a dragon kind of thing. In this position, from diagram 48, which is what we're at right now, everyone started out with a nice bishop, but more often than not, you'll find that your bishop isn't setting the board on fire, basically, because if it's like a dragon, right, it wants to breathe fire down the board, so it's not basically doing its most active attacking power. What do you do then? Being a fan of the Wizard of Oz, I tried closing my eyes, clicking my. He had Birkenstocks. He says that's a joke. Together and saying there's nothing like an active bishop. There's nothing like an active bishop. He was joking about that. He says after this move here, he closed his eyes when his opponent played it, and he's thinking, oh, I mean, maybe this might have been a student game or something, and or maybe just an example he showed him. He says that it's kind of one of those Wizard of Oz moments where you're hoping that you can get a move back, but you can't. Yeah, C4 is a good square, but that's the big joke. I like some of his humor is funny. Some of it is. Sadly, it doesn't have the bishop doesn't have anything active anymore, and so let me see. There's nothing. Yeah, like a bishop. Sadly, it doesn't have any desired effect. He says when he opened his eyes, the bishop was still sitting there inactive. That is funny. Still sitting there doing nothing, clearly inactive. Bishops will remain that way unless you do something about it. In other words, if you possess, he calls it a bishop who really doesn't do anything, is a lazy bishop. He calls it a lazy bishop that is sitting around daydreaming. You have to find a way to put the thing to work. This mix of bishop awareness and knowledge will empower you to be quite an effective chess player with your bishops. We're going to call it on that. I think that was funny when he said that when this move was, well, I think one of his students maybe moved this or something. I'm not exactly sure, but he says he closed his eyes. And he says, uh, "Boy, he did. He put his Bergstocks together. That was funny." And he says, "I wish it was an active bishop. I wish it was an active bishop." And then he opened his eyes, and it still wasn't active. That's funny. Okay, but what can we take away from this to a more serious? Because you always got to have fun with chess. A little bit of humor is always good for, as the Lord always says, it helps, build your immunity, make you happy, you work better, and you do a lot of stuff more productively. And so, with what we learned is if your piece is active, even though the pawns, or your bishop is active, even though the pawns are on all the same colors as your bishop, the bishop is active. We don't call it bad anymore, or good. We call it active, useful, or a tall pawn. Okay, active, useful, tall pawn. An active bishop is a bishop that is basically breathing fire down the board, are basically causing a lot of chaos in the position. Tons and tons of chaos. And it's making your opponent have to basically move their pieces to react to it, so it's causing a lot of reactive chess. A useful bishop is a bishop that maybe supports a pawn that could be queening. It supports the pawn so another piece can come over and help escort it up the board further. It could be protecting a piece that is doing a really important job for your army, or it could just be guarding a important weak pawn that needs to be guarded so that your other forces can focus on a kingside attack. A tall pawn, though, on the other hand, is nothing more than it's in tune behind its own pawns, and it basically is nothing more than a pawn on the board. It'd be like if there was a pawn here, and the only move that the bishop could have would be these two squares here, back and forth, back and forth. That's considered a tall pawn. We also learned how knights are important, how because we just did a little bit of knight work too, and that how knights are strong on they're more of a defensive piece and an attacking piece slightly. When they're on the third, the fourth, they're more of an offensive and more than a defensive piece. And then when they're on the fifth rank, they're totally dominant. They're considered almost an octopus. An octopus it has tentacles that reach all over the board. So what we'll do is we'll stop with that knowledge, and then I will say adieu. I want to thank you for all participating, logging on. If you like what you see, click follow. Jeremy Silman is really informative on how he looks at the chessboard, how he looks at the knights, how he looks at the bishops, and how we can actually do away with basically bad or good bishops and make it into 3 words: tall pawn, useful bishop, active bishop. And then you'll start not being so confused when you see like pawns being on the same color but your bishop's outside. It's a bad bishop. Shouldn't I trade it off? But if that bishop is doing a really good job, holding down the army, you don't want to trade it off. Even it's outside the pawn chain, it's considered active. So we know it's one of the 3. And we just have to stay focused on the task at hand. Remember that everything we learn is important, but there's one thing that's as important and even more important. It's the choice to receive the Lord Jesus, Lord Savior of your life. We all one day have to decide, what are we going to do with the Lord Jesus? Are we going to receive Him as Lord and Savior, or are we going to reject Him? Because we all one day have to decide. And that's why Bruce Lee said, when you learn something new, you could take it, and take what you know, and then be able to apply it. So if you learn something new, you can then maybe go play a 15-minute to a 20-minute game, try the new idea out. But don't play all the time, because playing all the time doesn't help you. You're not improving. You need to study more than play. Play is to practice what you've priorly learned, not to be something you do all the time. And then what you have to do is treasure your victories, learn from your losses, and remember that mistakes do not define you. It's how you handle the mistake that defines you as a chess player and a person in general. And that's an important thing to remember, is to learn from your losses. It's hard to do that, but then you can fix where you improved, where you are weak, and you'll improve. And that's where the Team Chess Cruncher motto comes into play, of hanging up your coats, hanging up your hat, sitting down and studying when most won't. Team Chess Cruncher does, and that makes all the difference. And as Wesley So says, serve the Lord Jesus, and as I say, God bless, and I'll see you next time on Chess Cruncher TV. Have a blessed morning, afternoon, and evening, and Lord willing, I'll be back on tomorrow. We'll keep pushing forward and having fun and improving and constantly getting better as chess players, and laughing a little bit right alongside with some of Jeremy Silman's humor, and learning new things to help us improve as a chess player and push us further down the road. That's what, now we understand what we inside of what Hannibal Smith said, Colonel Hannibal Smith, when he says even inside of a random position there's always a plan. That true. There really is no randomness. There's always a plan there. It may be that you have to maneuver your knight 3 or 4 or 5 times to get it to the right spot because it's a closed position. Hey, you know what? Do it. If there's a square that calls to your knight, go for it and put it to its most optimum job. Don't let it be lazy. Put it to work. It's a fighter too, and it needs to help the kingdom to be victorious over the other kingdom armies. Okay, 2 thumbs up. Hoorah, be blessed. I will see you tomorrow, and we will continue to do some more active bishops, and we're going to go through and learn how each one affects when we say about a tall pawn, which is a tall bishop, or we talk about useful bishop or an active bishop. We're going to go through each one of those, and we're going to learn about them. Okay, 2 thumbs up. Hoorah, be blessed, and I will see you tomorrow. And if you like what you see, click follow and join us. Okay, be blessed. Bye bye, Team Chess Cruncher. Hoorah.